This is the James Crepea Show.
We've got a blind date with destiny.
And it looks like she's ordered the lobster.
Oregonian columnist James Crepea.
I had some crackpot dynamite reporter at the first press conference ask me how in the heck we're going to possibly throw the ball when they keep a lid on their covers and who's the best pass rusher you've ever played against.
We're not the favorites. We're the other guys.
KORE 1050 and 95.7. Fox Sports Eugene. Here is the James Crepea Show, presented by Dairy Mart.
Hit the lights and lock the doors. Welcome, everybody, to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene on this Friday, September the 6th, the eve of Oregon's home opener against Nevada. So obviously quite a few folks coming on into town here in Eugene for the first home game. It's certainly always a big day on a college campus, the home opener, home opening weekend. As I say, a lot of people always flocking into town, going to the bars and restaurants on a Friday night. You've got a nice 4:30 kick tomorrow, so you can enjoy yourself tonight responsibly. I emphasize responsibly, myself included. And then wake up, even afford to sleep in for some of you, to miss those early kicks on the East Coast and come, wake up at halftime, see what's going on, and still make it to the stadium with time to spare, to say the least. So certainly a big weekend here. We'll chat about the Ducks and Beavers. We'll also chat at 4:15 with Adam Ronis. He is a former colleague of mine. He now works at fulltimefantasy.com. He is, when I say, if you are into fantasy sports, if you are not following this guy, and trust me, this is not because he's a former colleague of mine. We haven't spoken in quite a long time, actually, until I just hit him up to come on the show, to be honest. But he is the most obsessive person I have ever seen in the fantasy sport realm. He is unbelievably good at it. Works, like I say, at fulltimefantasy.com. Also co-hosts a show on SiriusXM. Does just a tremendous job. This guy has so many fantasy leagues. It is mind-boggling in every sport. I believe he may have had a punter fantasy league at one point.
Nerd alert!
This guy has got it covered. So we'll have him on shortly to discuss the opening weekend. So for you fantasy freaknicks out there who want to know who to start in your fantasy football lineup on opening weekend, we'll certainly chat about that with Adam Ronis, as I say, shortly. And Jim McGill of Bear Insider, we'll chat with him at 5:30 about the Cal-Washington game this weekend and get an update on the Bears and their progress, obviously opening with a win last weekend over UC Davis. But we start today's show as we did yesterday, yet again, and mercifully, I hope this is for the last time, on Antonio Brown, because the news is so big that it is really hard to ignore or move past.
Hit the light, will you?
And, the Raiders have hit the light. They've turned it on. They've turned it off. They've turned it on again. This saga has been tiring to follow. It has been downright exhausting to follow. Now, the word of the day being that Antonio Brown started the day with the Raiders, meeting with the team, a supposedly emotional apology with all of the team captains of the Raiders standing by him, giving an apology to his teammates for actions earlier this week involving Mike Mayock and a confrontation he had with the general manager. So in a span of hours, you saw a franchise have a run-in with a star player who has a notorious behavioral background and get to the point of considering possibly even outright cutting that player and costing them next to nothing in doing it, and potentially trying to recoup virtually every penny that they had invested in him, including a $1 million signing bonus. To now, all of 24 hours after all of that, and less than 48 hours after the incident between him and Mayock, now talking about, no, the plan is he will play for the Raiders on Monday night. He will not be suspended, as was suggested yesterday and was the plan yesterday. So on one hand, credit to Brown's agent, Drew Rosenhaus, for helping broker a cooling of the heads and getting this player back on the field for his team. On the other hand, how in the world, if you are the Oakland Raiders, how, if you are Mike Mayock, one of those old school traditionalist kind of guys, in your first year as GM with John Gruden in his second year, not only do you bring in all of these personalities, which obviously drew plenty of commentary from around the country and around the league about bringing in not just Antonio Brown, but Richie Incognito and Vontaze Burfict and all the rest. But to bring them in and now have a situation that everyone saw coming, you have a player confront you over a fine, go publicly over the fine. I'm not even getting into the feet and the helmet. I'm past all that. That's whatever. I thought it was all for theatrics and show, and he ended up getting a helmet sponsorship out of the whole ordeal. Good for him. I could care less about any of that. That was noise. The fine was something your employer and as the franchise has every right to do. The player doesn't have to like it, but rather than keeping it in-house, puts it public, confronts the GM about it, and you don't discipline him with playing time. It may just be a discipline of some additional fine, which, granted, Antonio Brown challenged Mike Mayock to fine him again after punting a football after the whole altercation, apparently. That's it? That's the message you're sending? That's where this is right now with this franchise. That a star player who, as I say, has this absolutely ridiculous past and obscene behavior, now has the support of his teammates, which you heard numerous players. Just pick the network you wanted to watch. That's all you could see on anything talking about football the last 48 hours. Everybody was talking about it. Every single former player on every single network would tell you, from Ryan Clark, his former teammate in Pittsburgh, all the way on down the list, that this was some of the most selfish, ridiculous behavior that as a teammate, if you're sitting there, you're going, what in the world? How are you unable to control your impulses? How can you not control your frustrations? You're 30-something years old. What are you doing? We need you on the field, but we need you to act like an adult. And to now completely about face, not only as a locker room for some, I'm sure, but to then tell a locker room that, as you watched on Hard Knocks, this is a locker room that has 12 rookies. 12. Not 5 or 6 out of the draft class. 12 rookies are on this team out of a 53-man roster. And I believe that also includes the practice squad, but nevertheless, 12 rookies on this team. You're telling a young team that not only is there star treatment for star players, which happens everywhere. That's okay. But we're not talking about being 5 minutes late for meetings. We're not talking about being at the front of the food line or sitting somewhere on the plane or getting the best parking spot. We're talking about direct verbal confrontation with the general manager at practice in front of the entire team that results in nothing of any consequence. I don't care if they fine him an additional $100,000 and you haven't heard anything about additional fines yet. But I could care less if it happens or not. The only thing that ultimately matters is playing time and the potential to hang that ginormous amount of money that he's about to be guaranteed over him. Nothing. Nothing. That is not the way to do it. I'm not saying that this won't lead to success. I'm not saying Antonio Brown's not going to have a good season. I'm not saying he's not a good player. That's all fine. That's not the issue. The issue is, what did you just tell the rest of the people in that locker room? What did you just tell all those rookies about what is and isn't acceptable behavior of a professional football player in your franchise?
Some coaches will come out and say, look, I'm going to treat you all fairly but differently. And I think, my own personal side of it, I think this is nuts why he isn't suspended. But I think this is Gruden's way of saying, AB's got a resume. If you've got a resume, I'm going to treat you more like this. Which I think is a terrible message
Again, I don't deal with. I don't have no problem with the star treatment issue. Okay, because believe me, you can take it from one sport to the next, and I don't like doing that as much. But needless to say, the NBA is run by the players.
Right.
I don't even know almost any coach now, other than maybe Popovich. There are very few coaches in the NBA who have any real true control. I mean, that's just reality. The players so commanded there. It's almost outrageous. But in the NFL, you've seen it plenty of times over where star treatment happens, and that's fine. But I'm talking about things that start to get out of control that you could have gotten your hands around. You're now condoning. You saw this years ago with the Giants when Tom Coughlin was the head coach and Beckham was going bananas against Josh Norman. And that game with Carolina, where they're jarring at each other, but then it was just getting completely outrageous. And there's penalties flying all over the field. And Coughlin, one of the most old school guys as you can find in the NFL, let it all go. Didn't do anything to penalize and discipline Beckham. And Coughlin found his way out of town.
What I don't understand is, in this situation, just last year, you had Khalil Mack, who sat out but wasn't creating drama, was doing everything, to try to leverage his position short of creating a spectacle, and Gruden chips him. He's gone.
And then had the gall to several weeks later complain about the lack of pass rush.
Yeah. And then
when he traded a Hall of Fame caliber pass rush.
Allows this whole circus to happen, and he just goes, well, we support AB.
In this particular one, I understand Gruden's in the spot that he's in. He always has to be backing the players because the minute that you can't lose the room in any capacity.
But he didn't even go speak to Khalil Mack hardly from what we hear.
That's a different situation entirely. On this one particular, you can't say, well, Gruden allowed this. Well, it's not really Gruden's level to allow or not allow. It's at the Mayock and Davis level to allow or not allow.
Oof.
And I do not understand how there is no real substantive penalty to Antonio Brown as we know it today. Now, look, everything's changed. As we know, every day this week, this story has gotten more and more bizarre and more out of hand. So for all we know, tomorrow we'll find out that he did get fined some outrageous amount of money. And he deserves it. He deserves it. And it's not as simple as, and I know it's the default that a lot of people go to, well, if you did that in your line of work, what would you... Hey, don't go down that road. Because in your line of work, you don't have to block a 330-pound human being. In your line of work, you don't have to run past a guy who runs 4.2. In your line of work, you're not risking a concussion on any given play. So let's not draw the analogies, okay? Let's not even go there. But I had heard commentary on the show that follows us, Steve, that I believe it was Rob Parker who was saying it.
Oh, sure it's Rob Parker.
I mean, I cannot even wrap my head around the logic he was using. It was absolutely ridiculous. Oh, well, because AB gets in a shouting match with Mike Mayock. Who's Mike Mayock? What's he accomplished? That's not... What the heck does that matter? Who cares? That's not relevant. You either respect the office and the position who's in it, or you don't. And Antonio Brown has shown over and over with multiple franchises that he doesn't.
Yeah.
No matter who it is.
Yeah.
It doesn't become, oh, well, because he's Mike Mayock, it becomes acceptable. No, he's Mike Mayock, the GM of the Oakland Raiders. You either accept certain power and authority or you don't. Antonio Brown has shown that he has not been willing to. And my view of it is simply this. It shows a horrible message to a young franchise. And I hope that this is the last time that we talk about Antonio Brown doing anything other than what he does on the field. Because this has been a absolutely nauseating story to follow, but it is one that you have to view and comment on because you can't avoid it. It has sucked all the wind out of the sports realm the last 48 hours.
Get your popcorn ready.
No kidding. Coming up, we'll chat with Adam Ronis of FulltimeFantasy.com. You're listening to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene. And we now welcome on to the program a former colleague of mine from many moons ago, has been, as I said in the opener, the most obsessive fantasy guy that I know in any walk of life. This guy has fantasy teams on his fantasy teams. It's obscene. We now welcome on Adam Ronis of FullTimeFantasy.com, also works at SiriusXM. Adam, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks a lot, man. It's been a while since we talked, and I guess you probably saw when we were working together, I was probably checking my fantasy team most of the time.
Yes. When we were not taking calls of high school scores on any given night, you were setting your lineups, I think, on a daily basis and tracking how. I think at the time you had 4 or 5 football teams, 3 basketball teams, and at least 1 hockey team with, I think it was 4 or 5 baseball teams. It was ridiculous.
Yeah. That sounds a little light because it usually is close to double digits for baseball and football. Basketball is tough now because they've moved up the season. So it's like baseball ends, and then football is a month in, and then I'm like, all right, I got a few weeks to basketball, and then it's not that way anymore. It's about a couple of weeks. So season-long basketball I've cut down a little bit, but I do a lot of season-long football and baseball and DFS as well. So, yeah, it's a pretty busy time, and I'm glad that I can make a career of it.
No question. If anybody could, it's you, brother, because, my God, yeah, as I say, double-digit number of fantasy teams, folks, in various different sports. So when I say obsessive, this guy has got it covered from every which angle, to say the least. Let's start with the story of the week and everything, and Antonio Brown, Adam. Now that he's going to play, we think, as of today, it may change 12 times by kickoff, but as of now, should you start him?
Well, yeah, if he is active, you definitely have to start him for sure because he's going to get a ton of targets, and the volume's going to be there. Now, he was someone that I was trying to stay away from in drafts this year. He was going late in the second round, but he was getting a lot of hype because people looked at him going to Oakland and figured you're paying him all that money that you're going to get a boatload of targets. But, I mean, it's just the last 24 hours in a nutshell has kind of summed it up, from the whole preseason to the cryotherapy with the feet to the whole helmet issue. It's a headache. And my concern with Antonio Brown going into the year was he's used to being on a winning team. Now, if you remember, we didn't hear anything from him in Pittsburgh until last year once we started to lose. What happens in Oakland? And I looked at their schedule. They could realistically be 1-5, 1-6. What's going to happen at that point? Is he going to want to leave? Is he going to try and quit? So that was one of the concerns I had. And, again, late second round for Antonio Brown, you look at it and say, wow, it's a pretty good value, but he's changing teams, new quarterback. I don't think he's ever caught a touchdown pass from someone outside of Ben Roethlisberger. When the Pittsburgh backups were in there, he didn't put up big numbers, and he has barely worked with Carr. So there's just a lot of things that are negative with Antonio Brown. But if you did draft him and he is active Monday night, you're going to play him. I just don't see how you have many better options. There was only one league where I took him, and the rules were very unique and different, which is why he fell to the third round, because it was a super flex league, and the tight ends got a lot more points, so it pushed him down the board, and that was in early July. So that was the only reason why I did it. I wouldn't have done it after. So in that league, I am going to start him. So I think if you have him, you start him, but you just can't feel good about him going through this whole season with everything we've seen from him. Something's not right what's going on right there with him, because it has been a nightmarish month for Antonio Brown on us.
For sure. Now, let's start with the early games on Sunday in the NFL realm. Adam, a lot of people high on the Browns think that this offense is about to be just supercharged with Beckham teaming up with Landry, and I got to see those two in college. That was quite the duo, with Baker Mayfield throwing them the ball. Everybody very high on the Browns as a team, but fantasy-wise, I know that a lot of people expect a lot out of Mayfield, a lot out of Beckham. What are your thoughts on the various different options in the Browns offense?
Yeah, from a fantasy perspective, I think they'll be very good. I think people talking about the Super Bowl with them is a little bit too premature. I think there's a lot of pressure on this team, and we've never seen them handle it. But Baker Mayfield should be great for fantasy. He was excellent last year, and that was with Hugh Jackson being the coach early on. I mean, you saw how he held them back, how they didn't go to Nick Chubb for several weeks. So you add Odell Beckham, it just opens up the offense. I mean, you could go back and look last year. There were a ton of throws. I was just watching some cut-ups the other day where Odell Beckham was wide open, and Eli Manning just couldn't hit him. And you're sitting there like, an NFL quarterback is not making that throw. Baker Mayfield's not going to miss Beckham. So he's going to be putting up big numbers. I expect numbers that we saw the first 3 years when he was with the Giants. Landry should be better for it because now Beckham's going to get most of the attention. Nick Chubb is a stud at running back. People have been a little bit concerned with him because of Kareem Hunt returning in Week 10 after the suspension. But Chubb showed he could catch the football last year. There were a couple plays he made. He just didn't get the volume. And with Duke Johnson gone, I think the volume will be there at least for the first half of the season. David Njoku, very talented tight end. It's a case of, will there be enough targets there for him? But I do think this Browns offense is going to eat this season and put up really good numbers for fantasy.
I know a lot of the top-end quarterbacks playing those early games Sunday. I'm not going to bother asking you about them because those are certain obvious ones that everybody's going to start them, whether that's Mahomes or Wentz, Matt Ryan for sure. But some of the other guys in that mix, you have Mariota taking on the Browns. You have Kirk Cousins and a lot of questions with the Vikings in that offense. Obviously, the Redskins and what exactly the quarterback picture is going to look like. Goff and how do they respond from the Super Bowl. Cam Newton playing the Rams in that early game. Who are some of those quarterbacks in kind of that below elite tier that not the not obvious ones who are pretty high for you, who you say, yeah, you probably got to start that guy?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good depth at quarterback this season. I think the one thing you have to look out for, and we saw it Thursday night, there could be a lot of slow starts to the season, especially with very few starting players actually playing in the preseason. And I think that's what happened with the Bears and Packers. These guys barely played in the preseason, and it was a lot of rust. The offensive lines weren't good. So you have to keep that in mind. But Cam Newton, I like a lot this year. Obviously, the midfoot sprain was a problem, but if you look back to Cam Newton, when he's healthy, he's always a top 5 quarterback because of his rushing production. He actually hasn't passed for 4,000 yards since his rookie year, and he's only top 30 touchdown passes once. But in fantasy, when you have a quarterback that runs like he does, it gives you a high floor every week. So I would just a little leery of him running early in the year. They said that he's fine, but I would think that they tell him, hey, with this foot, don't throw too much. But I love his weapons. I think this is the best array of weapons he's had on offense. DJ Moore is great after the catch. Curtis Samuel, nothing but rave reviews in training camp. He's an explosive receiver. And Christian McCaffrey coming out of the backfield, catching over 100 passes last year. So for Cam Newton, just get the ball in the hands of those guys. You don't have to – this is not the Kelvin Benjamin days where you're chucking it deep. Just put the ball in their hands and let them do the thing after the catch. So I like him. And I like Jameis Winston a lot. I know he can turn the ball over, but – good matchup this week, and I love the set of receivers he has with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Godwin's going to have a breakout year this year. I loved him last year, but he only played about 62% of the snaps. Bruce Arians has mentioned he's not going to take him off the field. I wouldn't go that far, but Godwin is a guy that you could play 90% of the snaps. And last year, in 6 games without Deshaun Jackson, in 4 of them, he had at least 90 yards receiving and 4 touchdowns. Now Jackson is gone, Adam Humphries is gone, so Godwin's going to explode. And O.J. Howard, it's just a matter of him staying on the field. We've seen him have a couple injuries the first 2 years, but he's one of the top tight ends. So with the trio of Evans, O.J. Howard, and Godwin, and a run game that is just not that good, no one has stepped up there, and a defense that is awful, the Buccaneers are going to pass a ton, and it's going to put Winston in a position to put up big numbers this year. Goff, I think, would bounce back. I think it was a bad start to end last year. He had a bad stretch. He also did not perform well in the Super Bowl, but that was against New England and Bill Belichick, and they had 2 weeks to prepare. But I think the big difference last year was no Cooper Kupp. When Kupp went out, you could see that offense wasn't the same. Kupp is the safety valve for him. He looks for him in the red zone. He extends the change. So I would look for Goff to bounce back. But quarterback is a pretty deep position for the most part this year in fantasy, but there are a few that have some tough matchups in week 1.
Let's talk running backs, Adam. We're chatting with Adam Ronis of FulltimeFantasy.com. Again, you can follow him on Twitter at Adam Ronis, R-O-N-I-S. Let's talk running backs, man. You mentioned Chubb, obviously, before with the Browns, but again, the elite ones, the Zeke Elliott's and the Todd Gurley's are the obvious ones. Where is that next tier of guys where the ones that you're liking versus the ones that you're saying, yeah, maybe not, let's see what they do here in week 1?
Yeah, I think you have to be careful with some of these rookies. I think the David Montgomery owners found that out the hard way last night because he did look good on a couple of plays, but he just did not get the volume that people were expecting. We heard a lot of positive things about him in training camp. So, be careful with a guy like Devin Singletary. People are very excited about him because McCoy is gone and they think he's going to get the bulk of the carries, but, Frank Gore is still there. They have TJ Yeldon, so don't think, all right, Singletary's the guy there now. I'm going to plug him in. I'm a little skeptical of him this week because I kind of want to see how that role plays out. Same thing with, a guy like Derrick Henry as they have some injuries on the offensive line. They're going against a very stout Cleveland defensive line. Darius Geis is another guy you have to be careful of because the game script does not set up well. Philadelphia's big favorites. Redskins have some issues on the line. I know Gruden came out and said Geis is going to be a 3-down back. That's what we drafted him to do, but we didn't see them do that in the preseason, and Chris Thompson is still there. So I think you want to be careful with running backs like that. On the other side, I really like Matt Breida a lot for the 49ers. I know on the unofficial depth chart they list him as 1 ahead of Tevin Coleman, which doesn't always mean anything. I think it is going to be basically a split between them. But Breida was very good last year, over 5 yards per carry. And even when he was hurt, he played through some injuries and really produced very well. And I think at least in week 1, we know he's healthy. And going against the Tampa Bay defense that is not very good, I think he's in line for a very solid game this week.
And lastly, we'll talk with the wide receivers and tight ends, Adam. Who are, the elite guys that are so obvious? That goes without saying. But who is that next class of the guys who are on the fringe, guys that people should start, guys that people should stay away from?
Yeah, Chris Godwin, as I mentioned, I love all year, and especially this week against San Fran. I think he has a big game. Tyler Lockett's going to have a huge year this week, too, going up against the Bengals. He only had about 70 targets last year and scored double-digit touchdowns, but Doug Baldwin's gone, and they don't have a lot of experience there. The only concern is if that game blows out, that they don't need to pass as much, but Lockett should be good. Really like Dede Westbrook this week going against Kansas City. Obviously, the Chiefs should put up points, even against that Jacksonville defense. If they rebound to what they were 2 years ago, it's hard to see them really slow down Kansas City. And the one thing about Kansas City is they did make some additions on defense, but with their offense scoring so quickly, it allows the opponents to run a lot of plays. So you want to have the offense going against Kansas City. And Dede Westbrook had a really good preseason. In the third preseason game, 10 passes for Foles, 7 of them went to Dede Westbrook. So I think he has a big game this week. I would look for the Carolina receivers to get off to a quick start with DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel. Josh Gordon's interesting. I'll really be paying close attention to him. He's going up against Pittsburgh, and he played in that final preseason game and looked pretty good. There might be some rust there with him. But I do think, he's a wild card this year. I drafted him in one of my last drafts in a high-stakes leagues in the 6th round just to get a piece of him, just in case. Robbie Anderson could struggle this week. He has a really tough slate of cornerbacks coming up in the first several weeks of the season. And going against White of Buffalo, that's a tough matchup for him. He's always capable of breaking a big play at any time because of his speed, but it could be a day where he doesn't get that many targets because of the matchup there as well.
Lastly, Adam, you mentioned you were in Vegas and out there for your company for working in high stakes. Give people an idea, because when I say obsessive, man, in reference to you and your knowledge of this stuff, what level of stakes are some of these leagues that you're out there for that you're not necessarily taking part in, but you're out there for the company? What are some of these leagues going for?
Yeah, there's some leagues that, there's $10,000 buy-ins, $5,000 buy-ins. There's some people out here that just, are high rollers and have a lot of money. So, yeah, those are some of the drafts that I've seen. I think there was a $10K yesterday right before the first game. There was a $10,000 buy-in. So there's drafts all the way up until tomorrow night. Eric Dickerson is actually participating in one of the ones for the Fantasy Football World Championships. He's out here. He was hanging out with us last night at the viewing party for the game. So I know he's drafting in the FFWC World Championship. I think that's like an $1,800 buy-in. So he was in it last year, didn't do so good. So he said he learned from it, and he's ready to perform very well this year.
Unbelievable. Well, Adam, we appreciate you coming on. Plug your stuff, man. Again, fulltimefantasy.com is where they can find you. They can listen to you on SiriusXM. Let people know when they can listen to you. Let people know where to find all your stuff.
Yeah, SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio, Monday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern. I'm on the FNTSY Radio weekdays 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern. On Twitter, at Adam Ronis, fulltimefantasy.com, and also contributing now for Sports Illustrated. So si.com/fantasy. Usually have about 3 articles a week on there. So, it's not that difficult to find me. I'm in a lot of spots. So, and usually Twitter is where I'll tweet a lot of the links and shows. So, at Adam Ronis on Twitter.
Absolutely. Look forward to having you on throughout the season, man. Thanks so much. Good to connect with you again.
All right. No problem, man. Anytime.
saw and reading a piece by my colleague John Canzano of the Oregonian and Oregon Live earlier today, making the case that the Oregon State game at Hawaii is their biggest game of the season. And I thought about it a little bit, and I say, I think John does have a point here. I think he does have a point here in a lot of ways. Obviously, the opener, again, they were 2 touchdown underdogs, and lo and behold, they lost by 2 touchdowns. Okay. But there is something to be said here that this actually is, in a lot of ways, arguably the biggest, in that this is a game that has a chance to be competitive. This is a game that, if Oregon State is going to show progress this season, that you have to improve upon 2 wins. That if you don't get a win at Hawaii, who is favored, that without that, you might not show improvement on paper and in the standings. You'll probably beat Cal Poly the following week. You get an off week, and then it's Stanford at UCLA, which I absolutely believe is going to be competitive, because I have zero faith in what UCLA has going on. None. 0. Utah at home, which, again, let's face the reality, that's going to be a monumental task. At Cal, which could be competitive. We don't know everything about Cal just yet. Off week at Arizona. I think that could be competitive. I say could. Why? Because their defense is also not very good. The problem being that Arizona's offense, as long as Khalil Tate is still healthy and moving around and agile on November the 2nd, could be absolutely lethal against this Oregon State defense if things don't turn around by then. And then, all right, Washington and Oregon later on, and Washington State, and we're not even going to get into Arizona State the rest of November. The point is if this team, if this program is going to show progress in the standings, in the win and loss column, where it counts, not just in some statistics, which are already obviously very much against them on the defensive side of the ball after the opener, this Hawaii game really does matter a whole lot. It matters from a recruiting perspective, and obviously the history there and with the recruiting pamphlets and all that. I know that story, but I mean in reality and going forward. I know what happened before, but now about now and the future. If Oregon State is going to be able to recruit Hawaii and recruit higher caliber players out of Hawaii to come to Oregon State rather than Oregon, rather than Washington, rather than Washington State, rather than Cal, it's got to go out there and show some success. It cannot go out there and allow its defense to get absolutely lit up again. This cannot be a game against a 4-wide, 5-wide, spread the ball offense from Hawaii that we know Cole McDonald just absolutely went berserk with 4 touchdowns. He also had 4 interceptions, but 4 touchdowns. That if they go out there, if they carve Oregon State up for 500-plus yards of offense again, 1, I don't know how Oregon State wins, even if Hawaii's defense isn't that good. And 2, I know Hawaii's favorite. I understand it. But I'm sorry. Oregon State is trying to show progress, trying to show development. And whether Jalen Moore plays or not, this team needs to show massive progress on the defense, particularly in the secondary, massive progress in actual pass rush and not just tackles for loss. I know that's an area that, since they had no positives to talk about by way of outcome or stats, the one stat that they were harping on as a positive defensively was tackles for loss. I get it, and they should. It was a big game for that relative to games last season. It was. That is a sign of progress on a night where there was very little. This is an opponent that is not a Power 5 opponent. I know they're still favored. I know they're a better team right now. Should be a better team right now. Oregon State, if it is going to show progress on the field, though, really, really needs this game. Needs this game, needs to do well in this game. I'm not going to say it's a must-win. That's absurd. That's ridiculous. One, it's week 2, and 2, it's arguably one of the biggest rebuilds in college football is what Jonathan Smith inherited. It's not quite Kansas, but it's up there. So I understand the scope and magnitude of it. But this is a very big game in terms of the recruiting aspect, in terms of trying to show progress on the field and at least match, if not improve upon, what you did last year, and in trying to change the psyche and the confidence and the mental state of mind of some of the players with that program. Because as we went over earlier in the week, when you have guys talking about how the sideline was getting mellow during the second quarter of the season opener, that cannot happen. It just can't. And if Hawaii, with how wide open they are and how productive they can be, goes out there and they pull away a little bit, that's going to be one of the things I'm watching. Look, I'm going to be working after the Ducks game. I'm going to be working quite late, but I will probably get home in time for the end of it. I'm not going to say the entire second half, but I'm DVRing it, and I'm going to watch. And one way or another, if Oregon State pulls away, wins, good for them. What a terrific win to pick up where you're the quote-unquote underdog, you're on the road, it matters. And if they lose, I want to know, how does it look? Does that defense show more signs of life? Does it get sacks? Does it get takeaways? Or are wide receivers running free 10 yards with separation away from everybody? Are running backs just absolutely gashing through the right and left side for 7, 8, and 10 yards before a defender comes near them? That's what I want to see in this Oregon State game on Saturday. I want to see, how does this defense respond to what was a dismal performance against Oklahoma State? And I understand the Oklahoma State offense is pretty potent. I'm not taking anything away from them. I know that Tylan Wallace is one of the best receivers in the country. I said it all leading into the opener. But it was the manner in which they played some of those guys that we were going, oh my goodness, this could be a long, long fall if that's the way this is going to look. So I want to see how they respond, but to the case that this could be arguably the biggest game because of the relative standing and depth of the program and talent of the program right now, I think you can make that case. If you're an Oregon State fan, you have got to be dialed in to this weekend's game. And on one hand, you have to. And on the other hand, good luck. Because trying to watch it on the Facebook Live is going to be quite the endeavor for folks. I know with smart TVs and stuff and what you can do and all that, I get it. I know. But I'm literally going to have, a mobile device propped up next to my computer watching it and trying to, record it and everything myself. But yes, I understand the challenge involved with some of the logistics. I'm sure there are ways around it that may exist out there. But ultimately, if you're a Beavers fan, you got to be tuned in this weekend. This is a big game. It is. It's a very big game. Can't emphasize it enough. Because last thing anybody wants to hear on Monday is Hawaii, some crooked number. 55, 52, 49. 49 might actually be marginal improvement. The last thing you want to hear is another 50-plus to, 31. That is not what you want to see. You need to hear, even if it's a shootout, let it be like Arizona, but Oregon State really needs this one. Really needs this one. We'll get into more from around the college football world coming up next. You're listening to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene. Start a first-time segment here that we'll have on occasion throughout the program. Well, couldn't help but notice. And at one point or another, I'll tell you the whole origin and backstory of it, but bottom line, couldn't help but notice. Just random things from around the college sports world, the college football world in particular, that I just couldn't help but notice. Couldn't help but notice that South Carolina AD Ray Tanner was commenting on Will Muschamp's $18+ million buyout, giving him what is always the dreaded vote of confidence after South Carolina lost its season opener to North Carolina. Again, Muschamp has over $18 million on his buyout. And needless to say, South Carolina has spent a good amount of money doing quite a few things over there, putting in more infrastructure, football facility, and indoor facility, and all these things. I don't know if they have the $18 million to buy him out at the particular juncture. I think he's going to be around for a while. Well, this was the quote from Tanner in reference to Muschamp's buyout. It falls in line with other coaches across the country. I'm as confident in Will Muschamp as the day I hired him. You know what he walked into. We had to build a little bit. And that in reference to, he was speaking to radio in South Carolina, and speaking of, yes, you know the situation that he walked into and that the roster that he inherited by way of comparison to relative talent in the SEC and SEC East at that time when he came in December of 2015, that was not the greatest, and that South Carolina was coming off a tough go. And ultimately, he had some success so far. He's had some kind of middling kind of years as well. And right now, he's still on his first quarterback. And that guy just went down. Jake Bentley would have been a senior. He got hurt. And now a year that could have had some promise, where there were, actually, I thought the over-under in wins for them for the season was not terribly good. Kind of enticing to go over. Well, Bentley gets hurt, and you go, oh boy, this could go sideways in a hurry. This could get away from them. And now, because of the season opener against North Carolina, Mack Brown, his former leader when they were both at Texas, Muschamp was the coach in waiting to him at the time, beating him now in that season opener. Now everybody in South Carolina is clamoring and is quite upset and wants to see the overreaction in week one in college football is tremendous. It's always part of the narrative in the college football world. But yes, down there in particular, always gets ahead of themselves in the fire everybody, we're never going to win a game again, or we're going to the championship after starting 1-0 with an upset. So couldn't help but notice that at South Carolina. Also, couldn't help but notice a couple of things at Georgia State this week, who is still just absolutely sticking it to Tennessee in every way possible after beating them as the massive underdogs and collecting $900,000+ in the process. This was a quote from Georgia State safety Remy Lazarus talking to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution earlier in the week. He said, I think, it's probably they, but they say Furman. I think Furman will give us a tougher battle than we faced last Saturday, if you want to be honest. I mean, hey, man, enjoy the 15 minutes. I hope Georgia State has a ton of success. But mercy, they are just rubbing it in to the nth degree.
That's troll-level expert.
Oh, it's phenomenal. That is terrific. Elsewhere within this, just to show you some of the thought process that's just plain different, man. I'm telling you, it's just different down there. It's different. Georgia State, the athletic department, this is not a booster. This is not a rogue fan who happens to have a T-shirt press. This is the athletic department of Georgia State. Prepared for the upset ahead of time so that the game ended at 6:58. A T-shirt with the score was available at 7:41.
Ooh.
Within 45 minutes, they were ready to profit off of their football team's upset of Tennessee in Knoxville last weekend. The T-shirt, for those who just want to have fun, maybe you have a relative who's a Tennessee fan or alum, and you just want to, have a little bit of fun with them. It is hashtag upset with the U and the T a little bit larger than the PS and E and in orange. So hashtag upset.
I like
the date of the game, 8/31/19, Knoxville, Tennessee. 38-30 with the Georgia State Panther right there in the center.
I like my friends from Tennessee too much to do that.
Oh, come on. It's college football. You have to.
No.
You have to. It's too good.
No, I like my friends from Tennessee too much. That's just mean.
Oh, it's terrific. Yeah, hey, at least you're not driving around the neighborhood with a box truck showing the game all week. Yeah, man, when I tell you the folks in Atlanta are just going bananas about Georgia State and that upset of Tennessee, but I assure you every SEC East fan base is just absolutely relishing in that one. And frankly, I know Pac-12 fans are enjoying it as well because it's an SEC middling or lower tier team who took one on the chin in a horrific way in week 1. And they weren't the only ones.
Nope.
So we mentioned South Carolina. We mentioned Tennessee. So yes, we're mentioning SEC teams, but SEC teams who lost is the point. So those are some things in the college football world that I just couldn't help but notice in week 1. If you had some things, either Oregon State or some fantasy stuff because we chatted with Adam Ronis or Oregon, give us a call on the Davis Roofing Hotline at 541-343-KORE. That's 541-343-5673. And we'd love to chat with you about them or anything else in particular going on there. We will chat again at 5:30 with Jim McGill of Bear Insider ahead of Cal and Washington, one of 2 Pac-12 games coming up on Saturday. The other one, obviously, Stanford and USC. Spoke with Antonio Morales of The Athletic, covers USC, earlier in the week, telling you a little bit about the Trojans. Well, you heard that KJ Costello will not play shortly after yesterday's show ended. KJ Costello has been ruled out for this weekend's game. So you will have 2 teams in what is a pretty big game in the grand scheme of things in conference play between Stanford and USC, both of them starting new quarterbacks. That is a tall order. A tall order for both teams. Both teams who, frankly, need wins. They both started with wins, but they need wins against each other. It matters a whole lot to the Pac-12 standings who wins that game, and they're both going to be relying on new signal callers. We'll chat about that and more coming up. You're listening to The James Crepea Show. And with Saturday's home opener between Oregon and Nevada, there will be several players on opposing sidelines who have quite a bit of familiarity with one another. Oregon Ducks safety Javon Holland played on a 7-on-7 team with Nevada quarterback Carson Strong. There's a lot of guys, particularly from the California region, whether it's Southern California, Northern California, who played with each other or against each other in high school, so a lot of old rivalries renewed. And in one relationship we have mentioned on the show and talking with various different guests over the course of the week, both Duke Rittenhouse of the Reno Gazette-Journal and Chris Murray of Nevada Sportsnet, that, yes, obviously, it will be a clash of the Sewell brothers. Penei Sewell taking on his brother Gabe Sewell in this game. And it's not just because they're on opposing teams, but literally taking on one another on a fairly regular basis. Gabe Sewell playing one of the outside linebacker spots in Nevada's 3-3-5 defense. Generally speaking, lines up on the side of the field against the left tackle, where Penei is. So they will face each other, maybe not on a every single play basis, because it depends on how many times Gabe comes off for, to get a rest, quite frankly. But they will face each other, and they will face each other with some regularity. And while on one hand, as I spoke with their father, Gabriel Sewell, last night after the show, and had a story today for the Oregonian, and you can check it out on OregonLive.com. Put it up last night after chatting with him, and several of you folks have checked it out, so appreciate that. This is quite the position to be in for the family. On one hand, a tremendous amount of pride that 2 of their 4 sons are playing in the same football game. One of their other sons, Nephi, is at Utah. And obviously potential for Oregon to play them as well if that's a Pac-12 championship game matchup. And their younger son, Noah, being a 5-star linebacker, visiting Oregon this weekend as part of the family's trip. And there will be over 20 family and friends of the Sewells in attendance, their father told me. Understandably so. One hand, a lot of pride. And on the other, a whole lot of worry and anxiety and nerves for those parents, because it, again, is not just watching your sons play. It will be watching your sons play against one another and collide with one another on occasion on Saturday afternoon. That is not a position many people would want to sign up for. That is awfully difficult. So in chatting with their father last night, was asking him and saying, because he spoke with several reporters over the course of the week, but in chatting with him said, all right, now that it's getting this much closer, it's Thursday night, how are you feeling? Are the where are the nerves and anxiety at this point? And he said every day it's just gotten high, the blood pressure is getting higher and higher, and the anxiety is getting worse and worse. I said, well, in that case, will you be able to, frankly, will you be able to stand to bear it? Will you be able to watch and when these things actually happen? Or will you have to turn away? Will you actually be able to tolerate this? And he truly did not know. And I can't fault him in the least. This is not a position any parent wants to be in. And I'm not speaking from the vantage point of being a parent. This is just common sense. This is
who's your favorite kid?
This is not a position you want to be in, of seeing your two sons play against each other. And he had referenced it in saying that he called it you're seeing your kids fight. It's what it is. It's playing a game, but given the violence of their positions, given the tenacity with which they both play, you're watching your kids fight, is how he compared it. And he said you have no interest in that. That's not anything you want to do. And needless to say, they could care less who wins this game. They do not give a damn. And I can't blame them for that either. It is not that is the least of their concerns. All the Sewell family wants to see on Saturday is for both of their sons to play well, and for both of their sons to walk off when the clock says 0 in the same condition that they arrived.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yep.
Because as their father said, if you watched what Panay did against some of Auburn's linebackers and defenders, and to think that his older brother may be on the receiving end of some of that, these are grown men. And they are going out and have real strength and real power, and they can do some damage. Needless to say, you do not want to see your one son, who's 325 pounds, coming downhill with a full head of steam against your other son, who's 240 pounds.
Do you think that with the brotherly competition, you might see a little extra physicality should the two meet?
No.
Because you know how some brothers are. They're like, hey.
No, because of the way they've both actually spoken about it this week. No.
Okay.
Because Gabe was quoted in Nevada talking to reporters there saying that on one hand it's a pretty exciting deal and it's something you want to do, and on the other hand it's really not. It's not. And Panay didn't put it in exactly those words, but on one hand he said, it really hasn't hit me yet, because we talked to him on Tuesday. Mm-hmm. So it's it hasn't really hit me yet, but I'm sure when I see him, and there's going to be some bragging rights and things, but we haven't been on the same field together in several years, and we've never played against each other and stuff. Yeah. So again, will there be some of it in general? Again, a lot of general pride and bragging rights at the dinner table at different points, for sure. But extra? No, I don't know about extra. I think these guys just bring it the level they do, and if they happen to see each other, well, then they happen to see each other. And I don't think they're going to be going extra, and I don't think they're going to be going light by any stretch.
Okay.
I think they're just going to be playing each other. And that's a brutally difficult spot for those parents. So if you see the Sewell family And believe me, they will be easy to identify because, as I put in the story, the photo in our story was a picture that their father sent to me of the image that will be on their T-shirts. So it will be Sewell Strong, the family motto, and one word being in the Oregon green, the other being in the Nevada blue, and the graphic featuring both Panay and Gabe. Panay on the left, Gabe on the right. Panay in uniform and background in green, and Gabe in uniform and background in blue. And they contacted basically somebody who does some of the edits for the high school recruits when they want to do and announce on Twitter and Instagram and all that their top, 5 or 8 or 3 or whatever, 20, 30, whatever. It's getting outlandish now in recruiting. Some of the gentlemen who do that, they contacted one of them to put together a graphic form for their T-shirts for that. So the parents, and I would imagine maybe the entire family, will be wearing those shirts.
Those are pretty
behind
cool.
the Oregon bench. They are pretty cool. So yes, if you see them, certainly appreciate not only that their sons are playing, but appreciate the position that family is in, because I can assure you, up until that clock reads 0, the nerves and anxiety will be through the roof for the two of them in particular. And it brings me to a story, actually, coincidentally enough, in Major League Baseball. This happened last night. Now, granted, baseball is not exactly a contact sport in the same way, but this literally happened in Major League Baseball between the Marlins and the Pirates last night. You had Brian Moran. Took 10 years to make his Major League debut, and he did so pitching to his younger brother, Colin Moran. So Brian actually struck out Colin, becoming the first player in Major League history to make his debut while facing his brother on the mound in what was a 10-7 win for the Miami Marlins over the Pittsburgh Pirates in Pittsburgh Thursday night. This is a story from the AP. Brian speaking afterwards saying, "It's incredible. I think the last 3 days have been some of the most exciting, moving days that I've experienced. I don't think you could dream up a cooler situation. I'm so excited I got to share it with my family. I got to go out on a big league mound." Again, this guy took 10 years to reach the majors. 10 years. 30-year-old Brian Moran fell behind 3-1 to his younger brother, and then he threw back-to-back sliders to get him to strike out on a full count. The 26-year-old Colin Moran then shouted toward the mound and his brother on the way back to the dugout. Speaking afterwards, said, "He's been my inspiration my whole life. He's never given up. That's kind of been the theme of his career. I would have given up probably. A lesser man would have given up with the road he's had to go through to get to the major leagues." And Pirates manager Clint Hurdle saying, I've naturally, I felt bad for the dad and happy. It's a special moment. It really is a very special moment. The parents have to be so proud and so pleased. And Marlins manager Don Mattingly saying it's just fun to see that, knowing what these guys have probably been through as brothers growing up. It's kind of fun for I'm sure, the family. But it was really the right spot in the game, working out with where both the lineups were and et cetera, et cetera. But I mentioned the story because it was obviously a storyline in this weekend's game between the Ducks and Wolfpack with the Sewell brothers. But what a bizarre and odd coincidence that I see this today, that literally last night between the Marlins and Pirates, two brothers faced off against one another, one striking out the other, and the pitcher taking 10 years to make his Major League debut, and in that debut gets to do so against his younger brother. A pretty cool story from that realm. Coming up, we will have our Hold All Tickets, our pick segment for Saturday's college football games. You're listening to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene. And now it is our Friday weekly pick segment, Hold All Tickets. So we will start just mentioning the Pac-12 games involving some FCS teams where there is no line, or if you can find one day of, well, we aren't day of, so therefore we're not gonna mention them. Though I will do a quick double check to make sure on Arizona State that something didn't change with the Sac State game. All right, so there is one.
Oh,
all right, so
Arizona State has one.
Yes, it usually comes out day of. So because we're day of, and because they're playing tonight,
okay,
and that's coming up just after,
okay,
we'll do a quick one here.
All right.
Arizona State is a 35-point favorite with an over-under of 63.5 against Sac State. Now, mind you, just like last week, Arizona State is in Tempe. It is well over 100 degrees. I believe it may be 108 at kickoff. So that game coming up later tonight. Line comes up day of, so we are not going to be able to do the same, I don't believe, with Arizona and Northern Arizona, but I will double-check that as well, because, again, sometimes these things happen. Right. No, we won't. So we won't only be able to do tonight because it is a Friday night game.
Okay.
35 for Arizona State, over under 63.5. So that's basically saying that if you think they're going to cover 35, that it could be 38 plus. Yet a 63.5 over-under. They expect Sac State to potentially put up 20 points. More. If they put up 21 and 35, that gets you 56. You still need another touchdown.
No respect to ASU's defense.
Apparently not. I'll say Arizona State. Man, and I know nothing about Sac State, but I'll say Arizona State covers just because they took the Kent State to the woodshed last week.
Yep.
I'm going to go under just because if they were able to hold Kent State in that, I'm not sure Sac State's going to be able to put up that many points, even if it's garbage time. I don't see how Arizona State's going to, it's going to be 49-20 something? I don't know. I'm going to go under 63.5. But Arizona State to cover the 35.
I've seen Sacramento State play tough against local teams in the past, but this is almost 2020. It's not the same Sac State team. I'm taking Arizona State to cover, and I'm taking the over.
You're going over?
I'm going
so
over.
You think this is going to be... Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so elsewhere in the Pac-12 where there's involving, again, FCS teams, so there's no lines as of today. Could come up on Saturday, but obviously we don't know right now. Northern Colorado at Wazoo, Northern Arizona at Arizona. Again, no lines that we know of right now, so we can't pick those, but we mentioned them. Elsewhere, in the top 25 matchups, Texas A&M at Clemson. Clemson a 17-point favorite, over-under at 63.5. I'm going A&M to cover. You had an A&M player guarantee a win. Not that I think he's pulling a Namath, but I'll go cover against Clemson. This is at Clemson, at Death Valley, where I've been, and boy, are they loud. And I'm actually going to go over 63.5, but I go A&M to cover.
I think Clemson's going to cover, and I think that it's going to go under. I think it's going to be a closer
All right, so
game.
we're total opposites there. And
yeah.
believe me, I ordinarily would pick Clemson, but A&M is talented. I just think they're going to be able to stay within 3 scores. But I can't say definitively. If it wouldn't surprise me if Clemson does it. I just think A&M's pretty good.
And again, folks, these are for entertainment purposes.
Yeah, believe me, we
not
are
investment.
literally not
don't
putting a
take your
penny
money.
on it.
Don't spend your money on us.
This is for pride, so that on Monday when we have loser at the window and accountability, we can make fun of each other.
I went 5 for 9 last week. Don't.
And I went perfect 9 for 9 on over under and did pretty darn good. So just for reference. No, not that anybody's keeping track.
Yeah, no.
LSU, Texas, the other top 25 matchup, top 10 matchup, actually, with all the stories and intrigue and Tom Herman, Ed Orgeron, and AD berserko behavior, 2 lunatic booster bases, etc. All kinds of things going on. Follow Ross Dellinger, by the way, who joined us on the program. He, needless to say, is down there along with many others nationally covering that game. He will have it from all angles. LSU minus 6.5, over under at 57. I'm going to go Tigers to cover the 6.5. I know a lot of people are high on Tom Herman. I'm going Tigers to cover under 57.
I'm still not buying Texas. But I think LSU will cover, and it'll be above 57.
All right.
I'm going over.
We're together on LSU, but you're going over. I'm going under.
Yep.
All right. To the Pac-12, Utah hosting Northern Illinois. Utes, 21.5-point favorites, over under 44.5. This is a tough one. This is quite a tough one because at 21.5 with a 44.5 over under, you're talking about basically all Northern Illinois has to do is put up like 15 points. And if they cover, that's 36-15 is going to, smoke it. I'm going to go Utah to cover, and I'm actually going to rely on their defense to keep it close to where even if Utah wins in a boat race, that Northern Illinois just doesn't score that much and that the defense has enough pride. I'm going to go Utah to cover the 21.5, under 44.5.
I think Utah is going to cover, and it's going to be over because Utah is going to score that many more points.
And they might. I can't say they can't. That's why I say it's a tougher one.
Yeah.
Nebraska, Colorado, and boy, do I want to be wrong on this. Cornhuskers -4 at Colorado in a game that, as we had Sean Keeler of the Denver Post on yesterday, told you tickets going for just bonkers money in this old rivalry renewed. Nebraska -4, over/under 64. Reluctantly hating myself and everything that I stand for. Nebraska, I will take Nebraska and lay the 4 points. I will go over 64.
I think it's going to be a tighter game because it's at Colorado. I think that, yes, the Nebraska fans traveling are going to make a difference, but I am actually going to be a Pac-12 homer on this one and take Colorado, but I'm also taking the under.
Okay, so we're opposites there as well. So you're taking the Buffaloes and the... Wow, you are high on Mel Tucker and anti-Scott Frost. And believe me, not that I'm a Scott Frost fan. I just don't see how Colorado has the team ready to play yet. I just don't, man. But believe me, I want to be wrong on that pick on Monday.
After last
week,
I so
badly want to be wrong.
After last week, I got to take a couple chances to catch up.
Oh, okay. Believe me, I would love nothing more than to take a loss on that one. Trust me. UCLA hosting San Diego State. Bruins 8.5-point favorites, over/under at 45. I'm going Bruins to cover, under 45.
Bruins to cover and under?
Yeah. Huh. San Diego State was in like a 6-0 game with Weaver State, I believe it was. So that's why. I don't think UCLA's defense is any good. It's just I think UCLA could win and win by bunches. I'm just not sure San Diego State is going to be able to do much.
Well, that's also why I think UCLA will hit the over, because I think their defense just isn't that good, and San Diego State's going to get a couple big plays and score. So I'm taking UCLA in the over.
Okay. Cal Washington. Again, we'll chat with Jim McGill of Bear Insider about this game coming up in a few minutes, but Washington favored by 13.5. I think that half could be really important, potentially. Yes. And the over-under at 43.5. This one might be the toughest game to pick of all the Pac-12 games. Because, one, the 2-touchdown line. I know Cal won last year. I know it was low scoring at 12-10. I understand that. But at 13.5, new quarterback, arguably better quarterback. The Cal defense is loaded. Their secondary in particular. Over-under at 43.5. What that's telling you is they're thinking 15 and then add the 2 touchdowns to Washington. So about a 28-17 game would go over. I am really, really leaning towards Cal to cover. Really leaning there. But, man, I just have a lot of faith in Eason. I'm torn on this one. I originally picked Washington to cover. I think I'm actually going to go Cal to cover the points. So I'll go Cal plus 13.5. But I will go under 43.5.
Washington's at home. As much as I despise this school, they're loaded. Cal on offense is a mess.
I know.
They're a mess. It's at Washington. I'm taking the Huskies to cover, and I'm taking the over.
All right, so we're total opposites there. Believe me, I flip back and forth in that game all day.
Yeah.
Stanford, SC, USC favored by 3. That line has moved a little bit throughout the week. Over/under at 44. I'm taking the Trojans to cover because Costello is not playing, and I'm going under 44 because I know nothing about these 2 backup quarterbacks just yet.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
It's too tough.
It's just too much. So I'm with you on that one. USC and the under.
And now to the 2 in-state schools. Oregon State at Hawaii. Again, good luck watching if you're trying to watch via Facebook Live. I'm sure there's some websites out there that could figure out a stream and get it to you if you know how to do that. I'm not going to direct you there because I'm not going to tell you how to do anything that may not be, strictly speaking, legal. But, it exists. I'm just saying, if you can't find it on Facebook Live somehow, some way, because no one knows for sure exactly if this is going to be on the Hawaii Athletics page or the Mountain West Athletic page or what the heck. But bottom line, somehow, some way, you're supposed to be able to watch this game, and it's not supposed to be rocket science. Hawaii favored by 6.5, over under at an astronomical 77.5.
That's insane. That's
highest over under of the weekend. I believe that still holds true. I'll try and double check that.
Not surprised.
Real quick.
That's just wow.
Well, I've been giving you my picks ahead of time the whole way. You give yours on this one because I'll see if it's still the highest over under, Steve.
I am going to take one more leap of faith that Oregon State can cover.
Wow. Really?
Yes. I think, as John said, and as you said earlier, I think this is the most important game of the year for Oregon State because I think the outcome of this game is going to set the tone for the rest of this season.
Oh, it definitely could.
And
it definitely could.
Because they're either going to come back on a high and go into the next game, and wax
Cal Poly,
or you're going to have a situation where Oklahoma State beats you twice. Your head isn't in it, and they are just going to get waxed. But I think they can cover. Man, 77.5 is a lot.
The highest. It is the highest total.
It's just a lot. I mean, you're talking like what, 48, 41, pretty almost, or 40, 30, 39, 36.
Yeah. You're talking about 35 to 40.
Both defenses are so bad, and Hawaii's quarterback seems to like to throw to both teams. I'm going to take the over. I'm going to take Oregon State to cover, and I'm going to take the over.
I am also taking the over because I don't think either defense stops anybody, and if they do stop anybody, it's going to be with takeaways that could potentially lead to immediate points, pick sixes. I think this could just be an absolute – this could break scoreboards the way these teams play. And I'm going to take Hawaii minus 6.5.
Okay.
Lastly, Ducks against Nevada. Ducks 24-point favorites, over-under at 61.5. 24 is a lot, and Nevada's pretty good. I'm going to take Oregon to cover, but I'm going to go under 61.5. I actually think Oregon gets up big, and then they just kind of cruise.
So some of you out there will remember the historical context of 2011 playing at Jerry World, losing the opening game to LSU, and then playing Nevada at home the very next week and running them out of the building.
In minutes.
I'm taking Oregon to cover, and I'm taking the over.
And there are picks for Hold All tickets. Again, we will have Loser at the Window on Monday to tell you how good or bad we did. Coming up, Jim McGill of Bear Insider. You're listening to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene. In one of the two Pac-12 conference games this weekend, we just had our picks. One of them was Cal and Washington. We now welcome in Jim McGill of Bear Insider. You can follow the work of him and his colleagues as well for Bear Insider at Bear Insider on Twitter and bearinsider.com as well. Welcome to the program, Jim.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Let's start with the Cal offense, man. Where is Chase Garbers improved most? Where do you see the most by way of development there? Because certainly that was a little bit of inconsistency at that quarterback position last season for the Bears.
Offense? What offense?
Yeah.
I'm still looking for it. Garbers had a really good spring, and he gave a lot of people optimism. He was pretty far ahead of Devon Modster, who transferred from UCLA and was expected to challenge for the starting job. Part of it was because Modster was learning the playbook, and they were kind of holding him back a little bit. But Garbers looked really good, and he looked good without a full complement of receivers. But this fall, he was a little erratic, and it made people a little nervous. And sure enough, in the game, he was erratic too. Fortunately, most of the erratic play came in the first quarter. If you look at his stats, second, third, and fourth quarter, he was real solid. But he missed on a lot of passes that were clearly open receivers. The interception didn't look good at all. The receiver didn't run the right route, but you don't throw that ball if the guy's not breaking right, unless it was a timing pattern where the ball was in the air before he broke. He completed some balls downfield for the first time, and actually one of the few times, I should say, in his starting career. I think he only had 2 beyond 30 yards last year. I think he had 3 last week, so that showed some positive signs. He had another one to freshman tight end McAllen Castles for around 30 that went right through his hands. So he had a couple of drops that hurt him, but he needs to play with more poise. The Husky defense is going to be a heck of a lot better than Davis's defense, and if he turns in a performance like that, it's not going to get the job done.
Yeah, and it's one of those that you look at the box score and say, well, 16 of 28, that's probably not very good, 238 yards, but 2 touchdowns and interception. It's not an awful day of work, but his QBR, for anybody who gives a damn what that stat means, for ESPN was 53.6. Which is
yeah, it's funny
because
it depends on what rating you use. The one that college football uses, it was 150, and I'm thinking, how in the world did it get that high?
Right.
So there's obviously some different methodology that's used between the two different types that diverge quite a bit.
Very, very much so. Let's talk about a little bit of a positive point for that offense being Christopher Brown Jr. I understand this is coming against UC Davis, but nevertheless, 197 yards rushing. That's a pretty nice performance for a team that was looking for a new lead back. It certainly seems like Cal's got it.
Yeah, Brown is a beast. A lot of people felt like he was just kind of a move the chains kind of a guy when they saw him last year, but he had a broken foot his senior year in high school, and he wasn't nearly as good his senior year as he was his junior year, and that kind of carried over into last year. He was solid last year, but there really was no burst. He showed strength. He could break tackles. But this year, starting with the spring, he looked like a different back. A lot of burst. He can pick up yards after contact like almost nobody else. 230 pounds, probably in the 4.6s. He gets a good head of steam, and he is tough to bring down.
Kekoa Crawford certainly seems like he's the new go-to receiver. There's questions of that wide receiver core. Do you think that he has solidified himself as that go-to guy for this passing offense?
I don't think so. I think he's going to be one of them. The guy who most are thinking will be the go-to guy is Nikko Remigio, who was a true freshman last year. He really shouldn't have been playing, but they pressed him into duty because they needed him. They were short on bodies with so many injuries. He's added weight and a lot of strength, and he's been so reliable in the spring and all through fall, and he led them with 4 catches last week. Crawford had the 2 touchdowns. Obviously, he only had 3 catches. Crawford is obviously a weapon, and he's a guy that was really criminally underused by Harbaugh at Michigan, and he's definitely going to be a weapon for him this year. But they have a lot of different ways to go this year, which is a lot different than their situation last year, which gives the offense a little more hope because last year there really wasn't any area that you could point to as a strength on the offense. The running game was uneven. Laird was injured coming into the season with his knee scope. They didn't have any backups really. Their receivers, their best ones, all 3 of them were injured. The tight end position was a non-factor. All 3 of those positions this year have productive guys at them. So if you get some decent play out of Garbers, he's got weapons this time.
What do you think of the matchup of that Cal receiver core where, like I say, there's a lot of questions heading into the season and maybe some that still persist against a Washington secondary that, look, it lost a lot of personnel, but it's one of the strengths of that defense pretty much every year regardless. They seem to reload very well. What do you think of that matchup between the Cal receivers and the Washington secondary?
Yeah, Jimmy Lake's guys always get it done. This will be a big test for them, especially on the road. I don't really know what to expect, honestly. I think a guy like Remigio, who is a possession receiver with real sure hands, I think he's going to have a good game. They've got some weapons that haven't been utilized too much, like Trayvon Clark, who was a JC transfer 6'4" receiver who had a nice catch and has had a fairly productive fall, but he's still learning the offense. Kai Polk is a true freshman that has shown a ton of talent in both spring and fall as an early entry player, but he made some mistakes last week. He's got to grow up fast. The tight end position has a number of weapons there. I like McAllen Castles a lot. He's a redshirt freshman, but he dropped a critical ball last week, and he seems to have a drop per scrimmage during fall camp, but he's super athletic and rangy, and he's a real mismatch up the middle. I like their other tight ends too. Jake Songus had a 30-yard reception, leaping one, showed a ton of athleticism too. And Gavin Reinwald is a guy that gotten a lot bigger and stronger off of his redshirt year, and he could do some damage too. They really have to spread the ball around, I think, for the offense to move the chains against the Huskies.
Obviously, the Cal secondary, the strength of arguably the entire team. I'm not to look past Evan Weaver, but as a unit, that secondary is maybe as talented as any secondary in the country. It's really high up there, and I think overlooked by a lot of people nationally, just because. Look, it's a Cal team. It's not a 9 and 10 win team. It's not a perennially ranked team, and people are probably looking past that unit a little bit. That secondary up against Jacob Eason, making a second start for Washington. How do you see them matching up?
That's a real interesting one coming into the game, because Eason was a guy that wasn't known for making his reads and playing under pressure coming into that first game, either at Georgia or in his camps. There was a lot of uneven play. The Cal DBs are going to disguise a lot of their coverage, and they're not going to be easy to complete a lot of passes on. I'm super interested in seeing how that shakes out. They haven't really had anybody take advantage of them last year, and they're all back this year, and they're really 8 deep. So that's definitely a matchup to watch. I think it'll be influenced a little bit by what kind of pressure Cal's front seven can put on Eason. If they get pressure on the edge, and they're gonna be blitzing for sure, and they played super vanilla last week. He's going to see some stuff that's not on the film. It'll make it easier on the defensive backfield against him with his big arm. Another interesting factor too is JC transfer Coin Deng, who led the team in tackles last week with 12. He's got these super long arms. He's like Inspector Gadget out there, and he gets his arms in the passing lanes, and the DBs love it because the quarterbacks have to throw around him and put more air on the ball, and that gives them more of an opportunity to make a play. So it'll be fun to see.
Evan Weaver, again, probably preseason All-American across the board with virtually every outlet out there, yet somehow was not in ESPN's top 50 players countdown, which don't get me started on that. I thought that was preposterous. But Weaver, one of the best linebackers in this league, one of the best linebackers in America. He's going up against a Washington offense that certainly always relies on its running back, Salvon Ahmed. Certainly a guy who had some success last year, now the guy they have to lean on most. How do you see him? And it's not only him against them, don't get me wrong, but, I mean, he is their best linebacker and probably best guy in the front seven. How do you see him being able to contain this Washington run game?
Weaver is just a relentless player, and I'll be absolutely shocked if he doesn't have a really big game this week. He's just all over the field. His motor never stops. He's super motivated to play against the Huskies. He grew up a Huskies fan, but that's in the rearview mirror big time right now. He's really motivated to go up here to his home state and show what he can do. I think he's a complete player. I mean, he stops the run better than most anybody. He was second in the nation in tackles last year as a junior, and he really was new to the inside linebacker position. He had been defensive end and an outside linebacker and then an inside linebacker. Now he knows the system and the position inside and out. He's just that much better. He can rush the passer. He blitzes really well. He contains the run game really well. He's a sideline to sideline player, and he drops back in coverage really well, as the Huskies and Haener found out last year with his game-winning pick six.
This is certainly one of those prime examples of games that, man, you just wish that the Pac-12 would have been able to get. And it's on FS1. It's a evening game. It's the Pac-12 After Dark deal. But man, oh man, did you wish this game could have just been in a better spot? Because I know that just because of how competitive it is, because Cal's got a great defense, and because Washington's one of the better teams in this league, and Cal's coming off a year in which in many ways it overachieved, this was a game that should have been a bit of a showcase, and instead it's the, I'll say typical, late game for the East Coast and Central Time zones where, unfortunately, we're talking about Evan Weaver, a lot of people aren't going to get a chance to see him, and that's a shame against a team where, like you say, he's probably going to get to make a ton of tackles and really be heavily involved and be a huge part of that defense, to say the least.
It's a shame. Only the most hardcore football fans back east are going to see this game. It's part of the trouble with the time zone. They play a lot of night games back there, but a night game back there is 4:30 over here.
Yep.
Don't know how to solve that problem. I guess if Cal were favored to compete for the Pac-12 North title, they probably would have rethought that. But right now they're kind of looked at as a dark horse. So they probably figured they could flip it in the 7:30 game and not lose too much.
And it does help with the FS1 bid. I actually think that helps more because it's a separate deal. It can compete against some of the other late games. But, yeah, it's a tough deal. Having said all that, Jim, how do you see this one playing out? Washington favored by 2 touchdowns, yet Cal won last year. It was one of the big games, banner wins for Justin Wilcox in a 12-10 hard-fought game. How do you see this one playing out?
I think it'll be closer than the odds. I think the Bears will cover, but I think the Huskies might take it 21-17, we'll say. So,
yeah, similar thinking to what I was thinking. I think Jim's on the right track here. Appreciate you coming on, man, and I hope we both prove right from my pride and pick standpoint and my standpoint.
Well, I hope I'm wrong, personally.
Yeah, so it gets more fun for you to cover things if you're wrong. Yeah, I know.
Absolutely.
Look forward to having you on, like I say, when Oregon and Oregon State are playing Cal throughout the season. Thanks, Jim.
Sounds good. Appreciate it.
You listen to the James Crepea Show here on Fox Sports Eugene. Couple of college football games underway to keep you in the loop on here on this Friday evening as we head into the high school season as well. But you've got Virginia up big on William and Mary early in the second quarter. It's 28-0. Wake Forest and Rice. Wake Forest leads 14-7. They just scored. There was an injury that took quite a bit of time off this one. Rice just scored. That is, Rice's quarterback, Wiley Green, while running an option play towards the right pylon, lowers his head in an effort to try and gain yardage, and gets, as a ball carrier, gets hit pretty good, to say the least, on his way in, and not by any means a dirty hit. It is a clean hit because he's running basically, again, this option-based, naked bootleg essentially, trying to get into the end zone, and the ball carrier is lowering his head. Very difficult for a defender to make a tackle without making contact to the head. It's next to impossible, which is why in those spots it basically cannot be targeting because he is not a defenseless player, and the ball carrier is the one who's choosing to lower his head. However, the Wake Forest defender, one, wraps up his legs, goes to make the form tackle, absolutely would have been able to make the tackle without assist from his teammate. He was going down regardless. There's no way that Green wasn't going to be tackled, well short of the goal line. The issue being that the second defender comes in and is trying to obviously further make the tackle, but he connects, and it's hard to tell in the replay, and I've watched it no fewer than about a dozen times at this point. I cannot tell if it's shoulder to head or shoulder to shoulder/neck, but the bottom line is Green was laid out and initially sits up, but then immediately leans and lays back and was down for quite a while, and left and was carted off the field, gave a thumbs up on the way out, but took a rough hit for Rice. So certainly hope that Rice's quarterback did not suffer a serious injury there on a hit that in so many ways looks like, and if it involved any helmet to helmet at all, you would say should have been, ought to be targeting. But again, because Green was a ball carrier and lowered his head in the process of trying to gain yardage, is not a defenseless player, it's essentially a situation that is unavoidable, unfortunately. A reminder of just the physicality of the game, but it is, in that particular moment, one of those very few instances that you can say truly is unavoidable, but a brutal play to watch. Those are the games underway. Again, Arizona State also playing tonight. Boise State, Marshall also coming up shortly at the top of the hour. We appreciate the guests joining us on the Davis Roofing Hotline. If you want to try to get a call into us here in the last couple of minutes before we call it a night and call it a week, give us a call on the Davis Roofing Hotline at 541-343-KORE. That's 541-343-5673. Also bring to your attention a couple of NFL games of note on Sunday. Certainly for the listening audience, I would think the Tennessee at Cleveland game to start Sunday off would be of particular interest. You've obviously got Marcus Mariota playing in that one. And on the other hand, the arguably one of the most intriguing teams and team that has a whole lot of people very, very high on them, being the Cleveland Browns, opening at home. The Browns 5.5-point favorites in that one against Tennessee. That's a pretty interesting and compelling game on Sunday. It should start off one of the early games to start off your NFL Sunday in Week 1.
And I think they've got it on KVAL. I think that's a game they've got on KVAL.
Okay.
So you can see it locally.
There you go. Well, that makes a ton of sense in a lot of ways. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
A lot of intrigue in a lot of ways there. The Bengals are at the Seahawks, and that being the most local one can get by way of the NFL realm. Seahawks favored by 9.5 and a 44.5-point over. Again, up at CenturyLink. The Bengals traveling there. That game is in your midday allotment. So interesting to see, obviously, what Russell Wilson and all looks like. Intriguing to see Ugo Amadi debuting for the Seahawks, assuming that they keep him active. I would think he could be, especially for special teams purposes, but some intrigue there. The Bengals kind of always provide a level of intrigue, good, bad, or otherwise. But intrigue in that, frankly, they're a team that, Perfect's not there anymore. This is a different-looking Bengals team in some ways, and this is not exactly the Bengals of yore. This is a new Bengals staff. This is a new Bengals team. So it's interesting to see that opener again. Seattle favored by 9.5. I think that's one of the biggest opening lines of Week 1. I would think 9.5's got to be. Yeah, Phillies favored by 10 over the Redskins. Those are your two biggest lines. So 9.5 for the Seahawks is actually pretty darn large. Usually don't see two-score lines in the NFL. The Sunday night game, Pittsburgh at New England. I know that may or may not necessarily get your juices flowing up here in the Pacific Northwest, but nevertheless, Tom Terrific.
The anti-Pats sentiment.
Right.
Will get you going.
Tom Brady, in his 100th year in the NFL, he's celebrating 100 years in the NFL. The NFL is celebrating 100 years. Brady also there, celebrating it very nearly against the Pittsburgh Steelers. That matchup just always intriguing to me. Obviously, it's Sunday night for both the New England and Pittsburgh markets that are bonkers for the NFL, but it's always a particularly compelling matchup. In particular, when it's at New England, you have the headset issue years ago that Tomlin brought up in the postgame, and always saying that it's always an issue in New England. These are two teams and two coaches who don't really like each other. They're not fond of one another very much. I'd say that there is respect, but not much else involved in this series. So that's your Sunday night game. Monday night, 2 games. Texans at the Saints, one of the other just absolutely insane NFL environments to be in. Saints favored by 7 in that one. And then also Monday night, and we will talk about it on Monday since we are an affiliate.
Hit the light, will you?
Broncos at the Raiders at the Oakland Coliseum. Broncos currently favored by 1. Over-under at 43. I can only imagine, since Antonio Brown has taken up all of the space in the sports world for the last 48 to 72 hours, that one can only imagine what the next 72 hours have in store before kickoff. We can only guess what else may arise in the NFL and Antonio Brown. Everything could flip back and forth 3 times over by the time we get to kickoff. He was getting into it with Mayock. He was going to get suspended. He was going to get cut. And then, lo and behold, no, everything's fine. He's going to play. He's going to play. He's going to start. Everybody's hunky-dory. Everyone's going to go out there and pose for a picture at the 50-yard line, all smiles. It's going to be, this is a circus.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, that's kind of part of the history and part of the lore and fun. In a lot of ways, mercy me, oh my, I can imagine that Mike Mayock at some points this week has had to have been thinking, man, oh man, can I go back to being in the booth? Can I get away from this? I mean, this is not what I signed up for.
But it's great for us.
It gives you fun and intrigue.
Hey,
you had Hard Knocks. It showed you lots of things. I think they left a little too early, apparently. But
yeah.
a lot of intrigue around this team. the good, the bad, and the ugly, but there's a lot of intrigue around this team. So you got the Raiders on Monday night. We'll obviously be carrying that here on Fox Sports Eugene, KRE 1050 and 95.7 FM as well. And would be remiss if I did not mention, yes, tune in to Friday Night Live. High school segment coming up. You can follow all the games here as Brian will be set to take over at 7 o'clock and give you all of that here on this Friday night as well. Glad you've joined us this week on the James Crepea Show. Appreciate all the guests. Today's guests, Adam Ronis and Jim McGill. It's been fun. Looking forward to next week. We'll see what happens with the Ducks in Nevada and the Beavers at Hawaii. Hit the lights and lock the doors.